How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today I'm really excited because we're going to be taking a look at an all-new, to us, Junji Ito book, and that is Mimi's Tales of Terror. I say new to us because this actually came out a long time ago in Japan, I think like 2002 or something, so it's about 20 years old. But in Japan, it got a reissue, and we're getting a new release to coincide with that. But it's a really cool book with a unique concept that I was really looking forward to, so I was really glad to pick it up because this is true ghost stories, kind of. Let me explain. This is actually a Junji Ito adaptation. He's done adaptations before, like No Longer Human or Frankenstein, and this is an adaptation of Shin Mimibukuro, which translates to New Earmuffs. And Shin Mimibukuro is a collection of true ghost stories and urban legends. I would really like to see the original book because I don't think Junji Ito adapted all the stories from it, and he also took a ton of liberties. He was given a lot of creative freedom to take the start of a story and go however he wanted to, so things do change a bit. I mean, Junji Ito is scary and surreal, but not necessarily realistic. So if you're going in wanting that true scary story feel, you'll get some of that, but usually this story does get into his surreal nature pretty quick, and at which point you're like, okay, I don't think that part of the story really happened. I also think, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that Mimi herself was a creation for the manga. I think they wanted a central character to tie everything together rather than just have a bunch of unrelated stories. And Mimi's a good enough lead, but, you know, it's sort of the thing is Junji Ito is about the surreal and is about the horror, and as people have said, a lot of his characters are more witnesses than anything else, and I kind of wish we got to know Mimi a little better. Like, I wish we got more of her personal story. It was always fun when the story tied directly to her friends and family, and we got a little bit more of a personal connection. And like in one of the last chapters of the book, we get to see the relationship between Mimi and her boyfriend get strained because of all this supernatural stuff that's happened. But yeah, it is more episodic. It is more about the individual stories. So even though we have connective tissue, don't expect too much of an overarching plot. But overall, the stories that are in here do lead to some really good, crazy, surreal Junji Ito visuals, and there are definitely, especially starting with true scary stories, which tend to work into that unexplained nature anyway, there is definitely a few parts in here that will get in and mess with your head, and I really did like that. It's probably not Junji Ito's best work or anything, and again, conventional wisdom says start out with shiver or fragments of horror, but I still really liked it. I liked the true ghost story nature being a sort of different jumping off point, and I did like that they did connect even though it wasn't the biggest thing ever, but to see a protagonist that's for no reason just going to stumble into all these horror stories, that was pretty fun. You know, wherever I go, there's going to be a ghost and I don't know why, and it's really getting to me. But overall, a really fun book, and I really liked it. In order to cover this further, I'm going to switch to the close-up camera. I'll show you guys a little bit of this physical release and show you tiny previews of each story. I won't be doing any major spoilers, which sadly means avoiding lots of the cool imagery at the end of his stories, but I will show you just a tiny peek of each one. Anyway, without further ado, to the close-up camera. Alright, here we are inside the castle taking a closer look at Mimi's Tales of Terror. Right off the bat, really fun cover, nice portrait of Mimi there with all the scary stuff behind her. Story and art by Junji Ito, original story by Hirokatsu, Kihara, and Ichiro Nakayama. Sorry if I mispronounced any of those names. But if we open up to the front flap here, it talks about how they're from the stories, they're from the collection Shin Mimibukuro. Again, not sure if I pronounced that right, but translates to New Earmuffs. So you get a little bit of the synopsis there, and we also get these really nice red end papers that are, again, collages of things that happen in the story. The back is Mimi in the circle there, a quote from the book, and we get to see rated T+ and $24 US. Not bad for a hardcover, that's 200 pages. The credit on the side lists the original authors as well as Junji Ito. Nice bright red, Mimi's Tales of Terror, Viz. And if we actually slide the dust jacket off, it does have a really fun under image. I like when it's not just the same thing or blank. This is actually, I believe, the original cover of Mimi's Tales of Terror, and her with the long hair is a really cool image. This also changes the spine to black, and we get this fun kind of notebook drawing on the back of different creatures from the story. That's pretty cool. Now that being said, the corners do have some wear as well as this part up here. I kind of wish it was a little bit stronger, but whatever. I looked at the bookstore and they were all like that. Anyway, title page is the same as the front, but in black and white. And then we get the stories. And we note with these stories, there are 8 here, and then the afterword is like a cartoon of Junji Ito talking about the book. But you'll notice how some are kind of longer, 87 to 121. So you get some of the longer ones that are like 30 to 40 pages. But some of them are really short, like on the utility pole, page 3 to page 7. That's only like, what, 4 pages? And then 7 to 37, so that's like 30. And 37 to 47, that's only like 10 or so. So yeah, they do really range, and they are on kind of the shorter side, because Junji Ito a lot of times works at 60 or so pages. So lots of shorter stuff. We get the monster prop bonus story, and then a written afterword. We also get a note on the translation about how this takes place in the Japanese countryside, where they all have an accent, and they try to translate the accent a little bit. The back has the legal and copyright, first printing October 2023 in the States. And then the written afterword by Junji Ito has a few really interesting things as well. He's talking about how this is long out of print, and he's glad they had a reissue. And he also talks about how he's glad there was a place for the monster prop story, which never got collected in book form, and he really wanted it to be printed somewhere. Talks about the dialect, and he also talks about how he was young and ambitious and wound up changing a lot from the original stories, and said that in retrospect he feels like he was being really rude, and he was glad that the original story's creators weren't mad at him and let him do whatever he wanted. We get some sketches from the bonus monster prop story as the background, and it says down here that these were saved by one of the authors of the original book. So even though Mimi's not in monster prop, I do wonder if that came from New Earmuffs or not. Anyway though, let's go ahead and take a little bit of a look at the stories. I'm not going to do any major spoilers, but I do want to do just a little preview of each one. Anyway, starting off with On the Utility Pole, note that not all of the stories have big title pages, and sometimes they're just written in the first panel here. But Mimi and her boyfriend, and they notice some strange spirit on top of the utility pole. A fun, cool image with a bit of a jump scare, but overall, yeah, this is like 4 pages, so let's not go any farther. The Woman Next Door. This is a pretty interesting story where Mimi's living in an apartment and she has a noisy upstairs neighbor that she's going to confront, and the neighbor will say, well, the lady next door never complained about the music. But then we see the lady next door and she's quite strange. The other neighbor says, oh yeah, I hardly hear a peep out of her, but when I see her come out, it appears that there's actually 3 women that all look exactly the same but are different heights. We later see the next door neighbor all shooken up, and we're going to see one of the other women, the incredibly tall one. So yeah, what's going on here? It is something very strange, and eventually he's going to move out mysteriously. Mimi's going to take his apartment because it's better, but she's gonna get a little tempted when she sees this hole in the wall and uncover a very strange and bizarre truth. Again, not a super realistic thing to happen, but it is a fun Junji Ito thing. Anyway, after that we get Rustle in the grass, and we get Mimi and her boyfriend going through a nice walk in the woods. Then they hear something. The boyfriend runs on ahead, and you see that he's really scared, and it turns out there is a suicide in the woods. But even though they found the suicide and they think, oh, it's just the shoe falling off, that's what we heard? No, they continue to hear that same noise over and over again. They don't know what it is, and there's a fun supernatural twist. Out of all the stories in Mimi, this one is the most realistic, but also really does have that feeling of a true ghost story. It's a simple one, but quite effective. Anyway, after that is grave placement with Mimi behind the tombstones, and it turns out that even though Mimi's last apartment was pretty bad, she moved into what may be a worse one. She goes into this apartment, and there is a ton of graves behind it. She's next door to a cemetery. Well, that's a little bit unnerving, especially they find that one of the graves has this mound in it, and apparently it's quite common in Japan to be cremated and kind of weird just to be buried. So when there's a burial mound, she's a little disturbed that there's an actual dead body in the earth. She tries to go to sleep, and she hears something that keeps her up, a strange groaning sound coming from the cemetery right behind her window, and she'll ask a neighbor who says he didn't hear anything. The neighbor's a weird character who just keeps working out, kind of a strange guy. And when she goes, she's going to see that the graves are literally turning towards her window. It leads to a great final Junji Ito image at the end, but when we find out what's going on for a long period of this story, it is kind of weird, but not in the standard strange Junji Ito way, just a really weird plot that's going on here in the cemetery. I don't know, it's one that's given a lot of pages, but it's not necessarily my favorite. After that, we do get probably one of the better ones in here, and this one's called Seashore. And Seashore, I felt, was really good. Again, lots of that classic ghost story stuff. You get to see Mimi's friends, and they drive to the beach, and they get there really late, and they just decide to sleep in the car. Now, when they're all asleep, Mimi's going to hear something, and it turns out a ghost is crawling up out of the water and walking past their car. Yeah, that is definitely sounding like something from a true scary story, and there he is all rotten and stuff. That's pretty fun. But eventually, they'll meet this bartender the next day, and she says, oh, you saw one of those? Yeah, people drown all the time on this beach, and it's super haunted. And we do get where one of Mimi's friends tries to flirt with her, and then she says something like, you guys better be careful, especially you. And that kind of puts an omen on him, because this is like the girl that sees everything. What is she seeing? And what happens to him is really scary. And overall, I do really like this ghost story. Again, it is one of them that's on the more realistic side. And then after that, we get Just the Two of Us. And we see this woman lighting herself on fire. A very, very striking opening. And you even get a double page spread here. And then Mimi will go back home. I do like seeing Mimi's personal life. Her family works at a bakery, and there's a strange little girl at the house. Turns out something happened with her parents, and she's going to be staying with us for a while. and she's very attached. Now I wonder what happened to her parents. Well, she clings on to Mimi, and they'll soon find things like all this mysterious black powder on the floor leaving footprints. The little girl is terrified of something, and we get this really nice scene almost out of a James Wan movie where she's crying and then soot in the shape of a hand appears on her face. Yeah, something still wants that child, and this is a fun one as well. And again, I also like the personal connection, and it does lead to a scary Junji Ito picture at the end, and a fun sequence toward the end of this one as well. After that, we get Scarlet Circle, and there's Mimi. That's the image from the back cover of the book. And this one I really do like. You know, we get Mimi having a fight with her boyfriend because he kind of keeps trying to explain the supernatural. And then when Mimi's left with her best friend, her friend goes, "Oh, I believe the supernatural. Come see this." And it's her uncle's house, which is getting demolished. Turns out they found this big hole in the ground, and this takes them into a secret underground room, and it's completely walled in and even has the floor in there, and it has a mysterious red circle on the wall. What is going on there? And she says they found it because the ceiling caved in, and that's why there's a hole in the roof, but until the ceiling caved in, there was no real entrance in here, so it was just a sealed-in room under their house with no entrance or exit, just hanging out in the dirt for no reason, and no one remembers why it was there. And of course, the grandpa doesn't know anything about it, but eventually the uncle, the grandma, the grandpa are all gonna start disappearing, and they think that it has something to do with this room. And I really do love when it says grandma disappeared. There's just her in this black circle there. Such a sad image, really. But I do like how this one is so incredibly unexplained and so bizarre. And I do also really like that scary idea that you don't really know what's in the dirt underneath your feet. That's crazy. Anyway, the last one, Sign in the Field, is another short one. Mimi's walking through this field, she sees a sign, and the sign stretches out, not into the shadow of a sign, but the shadow of a man. Really short, but really cool. And this is something that happens too, because sometimes, man, when you see signs at night, some of them look a little strange. And also, the info in the book didn't do a great job telling me when this book was made, but the sign says 2002, so I'm guessing that's when these originally came out. But anyway, the afterword, as I said earlier, is cartoon Junji Ito talking about the book. I won't dwell on that too long. And then we get Monster Prop, which opens with a few color pages. And we get to see this group of kids finding a collapsed door with hair sticking out. Something's under the door. And this turns into a memory of hers that really sticks in her head. She gets a job at this event place, and they're hauling in all the props from a haunted house. And they talk about how the truck constantly thunks, and sometimes they find props they don't remember having before. That's great. They talk about making a new prop, and Mimi starts to explain the scary event she had from her childhood. They go to the prop maker, and this is a fun excuse for Junji Ito to draw a bunch of classic monsters. There's Junji Ito's Creature from the Black Lagoon, but legally distinct, of course. Oh, and there's Nosferatu. But the prop maker will hear the story and suddenly really like it, and then she'll try to do the moan she heard from under the door, but nothing is going to capture that creaky moan, and how can she get it herself? Overall, a pretty fun section of stories. It's a shorter Junji Ito book, and it only has 9 stories, and a lot of those stories are kind of short, but I do like that true ghost story section is an interesting way to distinguish this book from other Junji Ito stuff, and it does lead to some fun, more realistic sections at times, like the sign or the beach story. It's got some cool stuff in it. So overall, not the biggest thing ever, and maybe not the best introduction to Ito, but some fun stories in here. I read it pretty fast and really did like it, so I can definitely recommend it. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist at the bottom. This should be my Junji Ito playlist, where you can see me review a ton of his other work. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.